Welcome to you all. I hope you are all safe and well, and welcome to the SRA Talking Topics, our first ever Talking Topics, and delighted to have you here today. We decided, having received such excellent feedback last year from our CEO party with Michael Portillo, for those of you who attended virtually, unfortunately, you had such a great time and great feedback that we put our heads together to try and look at a program of events that could support you as leaders in the sector across this year. We know it's been a pretty tough year, to be frank, as leaders across the sector and generally just day to day. And I'm sure you're reflecting on the news from last night in terms of what that now means for you personally and also for your own organisations. But we wanted to ensure that as a part of next year, we could reach out to a few of you and start to identify some areas that you might need some help. And leadership resilience and well-being was top of the list, alongside leading and managing change, building organizational resilience, and managing senior relations. I'm sure many of you on the line today will have been thinking through some of these areas and involved in throughout the last year. Now, these sessions ideally will be done both face-to-face and virtual when we're allowed to, but at this moment in time, obviously, we are virtual, and it gives us a safe space to ask questions and to learn from both internal speakers from the sector and external speakers from the sector as well. Dates for your diary just include Wednesday, the 23rd of February is the next session, Thursday, the 31st of March, and Thursday, the 28th of April. More details will come to you, but if you want to pop those in your diaries, that would be super. And I've got to say thank you, a huge thanks to Gately and Howden as ever for providing all the resources, including this platform, to support the delivery of the series. And just before handing over to the team at Gately, just a quick flag around our Fit for the Future convention. We've changed the date to the 2nd of February, due to be face-to-face, but watch this space if we will move to virtual. The theme is embracing technology, and we've got colleagues from Simspur, Sport England, London Sport, Microsoft, Jomo, and Air IT joining us. So put the 2nd of, and we look forward to seeing you then. So I'm going to pass over to Abby from the Gately team, who's just going to walk through some of the house rules of using this system, and then she'll introduce Air Commodore Rich Bogdan for the session. Thank you. Over to you, Abby.
Thanks, Lisa. So yes, before we introduce our guest speaker, for those of you who haven't used Remo before, during the presentation, you have got opportunity to submit your questions. You can do this by using the menu on the right-hand side of your screen. You can open the menu by clicking the speech bubble if it isn't already open, and at the top you should see a tab that says Q&A. If you can please submit your questions here rather than the chat function, it just means all the questions are in one place, making it easy for our speaker to spot them when he comes to answer them later. And you can also upvote any questions you see in there that you'd like to be answered. The more votes each question gets, it just moves it to the top of the list. Also, after the presentation, you will have opportunity to network, and we'd really love it if you could stay on and join us. You can have a chat with the other delegates that have joined the session today, talk to the speaker, and of course the SRA team as well. So when we get to the end of the presentation, we'll move back to the networking floor where you saw all the tables and chairs. So if you just double click on an empty seat, that'll move you to that table. You can click on the screen and drag it around so you can see the other tables and see where people are sat. And then once you've joined a table, you'll see in the control panel at the bottom, you can turn your microphone and camera on there. And then you can also update your profile. Any technical difficulties during this session, our first recommendation is to press Control and F5. This will refresh your system and your screen, and we find this does tend to fix most issues, but if you are still experiencing any problems, then please do drop myself or my colleague Jane Ramsell a message in the chat, and we will try and help you as best we can. So now I would like to give a warm welcome to Air Commodore Rich Bogdan, who is our guest speaker today. A little bit more about him before I hand over. He joined the RAF in the mid-80s, and in his career he served in joint and single service staff and command appointments in the UK, Europe and the Middle East. He's seen operational service during the First Gulf War, in the Balkans, Afghanistan and also elsewhere. He is a graduate of the Advanced Staff course, Cranfield and King's College, and he became the Director RAF Sport in December of last year. He and his team are responsible for the oversight of RAF Sport's 50+ associations. And in concert with the RAF Central Fund and the RAF Sports Federation and other supporters, he is very keen to develop service sport to provide recognised, resourced and rewarding opportunities for all and at each and every level, and to also develop service personnel both collectively and individually and contribute to their mental and physical well-being and resilience. So I'm sure he'll be much better at telling you all about that than I am. So a warm welcome to you, Rich. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much indeed, Abby. Real pleasure to be here this afternoon. And actually, Abby's introduction there is effectively in two halves: what I used to do and what we do now as a team in RAF Sport. And I think what I'd like to do this afternoon, if I may, is split what I'm going to talk to you about into those two halves. A little bit about what's gone before and a little bit about RAF Sport for those of you who may well be unaware of it. And I would say it's an interesting area, perhaps for many there, from the point of view of what is the Air Force about, what is defence about, and perhaps a different industry than many of you have come from. I would say at the outset, although I've had operational service, I am not a warfighter in the sense I'm a logistician by background. There's a saying by a US Admiral that used to be an historic US Admiral that said, "You're not relevant if you cannot get to the fight." And my role over almost 34 years in the service previously was to make sure we could get to the fight, whatever that fight looked like. Was that famine relief? Was that force for good? Or was that high-end war fighting? To make sure we get to the fight and do what we needed to do and get home again safely. And that kind of encompassed personnel, it encompassed equipment, maintenance, supply chains, medical and finance and things like that. So that's my area. And I do like to say to people sometimes, I did almost 34 years as a regular officer in the Air Force. Had a great time, and I would do it all again at a drop of a hat and wouldn't change a day of it. And the reason I say that, I'm delighted to be able to say that, because I'm not sure everybody's in that boat. So that's not me being smug. That's me just saying what a great time I've had, and I would thoroughly recommend it to all. I think it's an interesting industry from the point of view of we exist to deliver force. I sometimes say to people, our industry is violence. And that's a horrid thing to say, but it's quite a hard-edged thing to say. That's why we exist, to protect, to deter and defend the United Kingdom and its interests. But we also exist to promote prosperity across the globe and act as a force for good, as well as then project that influence around the world as well as we can. But it is quite an interesting area and quite a departure. And sometimes I would offer a bit of a misunderstood part of our networking or our situation. As I said, my intent this afternoon, if it's okay with you then, is to talk about a personal reflection on leadership. And I did find it quite a challenging area to consider when I was invited to do this talk. Or indeed I was dobbed in by a colleague to do this talk, which I am pleased to do, because I find it's an area that I don't necessarily do in the way of doing self-analysis or looking at what leadership or what other areas mean. So it's kind of an interesting challenge, and probably one I might have overthought a little bit, but you'll let me know about that. We do, through our command and staff training in the services, look at leadership, and I probably studied it and considered it more than I realised. And indeed, we have the TEDA Leadership Academy in the service that actually looks at historical perspectives, contemporary perspectives, and also looking to the future, all as part of something I'm going to talk to you about in a moment. So let's say the first half will perhaps talk about leadership, and it is a very personal perspective, and I hope it will offer some food for thought. I hope I'm not just telling you all what you already know, but perhaps we can discuss that in question and answers as we go ahead. And then the second half, I say, is about RAF Sport and perhaps the pertinence of leadership, the pertinence of RAF Sport to the delivery of service outcomes. So Abby, if I could ask, I did do some slides. I wasn't going to do some slides, and I thought I'd better do, partly to help me, help you, but also to perhaps introduce a slightly different area than some of you might be used to. So Abby, if I could ask for the first slide, please. RAF Sport succeeding safely, and I put this up. It's a slide I used as a title slide for a previous presentation to a safety forum. And the reason I put this up and leave it there for a moment is we're about success. We're about success in the service. We're about success in sport and safely. And of course, that's common sense. We all wish to do our sport safely. But there's quite a difference perhaps between some of the sport that you all might be involved in and some of the sport that we do, in that we do sport in the service on duty, effectively therefore at work. So if you're flying a Typhoon aircraft through the Welsh Valleys, or you're driving a forklift truck in a warehouse, or whatever it is you're doing, or you're playing sport on duty, then it is required to be done safely and at work. And therefore I am the director of sport, but I'm also the inspector of sport. Yeah. So everything I talk about in RAF Sport today is replicated in some form in the other two services as well. But clearly there was a choice at the careers office, and I made the right one. I guess what I would say is that I am living proof that you don't have to be an athlete to be involved in sport. I proudly say, in a way, that I come last in the RAF Halton cross-country competition. I'm delighted I can still do it. The person who wins it has a different perspective on there as well. You don't have to be an athlete to be involved in sport. Next slide, please, Abby. So as I said, leadership is very much a personal perspective I'm going to offer as to what do I think over my 34 years service, almost 34 years service as a regular, and I should say as a regular officer in that I was employed in a logistics role for that period of time. I then came out of the service and became a civil servant, so a civilian, working in the military environment, but I do have some other experience outside the military environment as well. And then I was delighted to come back into this role, which I've been in, say, just over a year now, as the director of sport, to hopefully take our sport on to the next place we wish to go. So this leadership piece is a personal perspective on what I think are some of the key tenets of I've seen missing on occasions, and probably some I've missed myself on more than one occasion as I've gone through my career. And the first perspective I would offer is that I think we really do need to understand the context in which we're operating. Defence itself sits in a geopolitical space. Defence sits in a competitive space, both externally with national state actors and other organisations, be they terrorist organisations or whatever. It has allies. It has interconnectivity with commerce and industry and whatever. Operating in whatever space we're operating in, it's really important we understand the context and the influences and the drivers on that context, and very importantly, maintain the understanding. I think we've probably all seen in the last few years companies that were blue chip companies going back a number of years, a number of decades, may have been found themselves wanting by not understanding how the world had moved on around them and perhaps falling, and then the success stories of those that did understand the world around them. A really small example of that is I turned up a number of years ago to run a training wing, and the training wing took students from effectively raw recruits into the service almost through their initial professional training at a very basic level, all the way up to first and second degree level. And we had a couple of thousand students a year used to do that. I turned up into the organisation and it was doing really, really well at delivering training that in large part had become irrelevant because they hadn't checked against the context we are now operating in as to how the world had changed and how the as you go back a number of years to one of the pieces that Abby mentioned, was the first Gulf War was quite a seminal moment in my career, but it was quite a seminal moment in defence. We'd fought the Cold War for decades prior to that with Russia and with the Soviet Union as it was. And the training that was being delivered was still very much focused towards that type of operation. Whereas when I turned up for over a decade, we'd been doing very different kind of contingent operations. The first Gulf War was one, Iraq was the second Gulf War, and getting into Afghanistan. And we had not moved that training on. So we were really good at polishing a quite an irrelevant product, if you like. They had not looked up and not understood the context. So massively important to understand the context as it is. Processes, we always have a thing called a question for moment. So you go through all the understanding of the context, do an entire what's called an estimate to come up with an operational plan, and question 4 in your analysis of that plan is, has anything changed? And you come back to the very beginning of your planning, just to make sure that that's in the right place. Is to understand what we're doing. And then I think within that is to identify the why we wish to do something. What is the vision you have, and what is the mission? And those, from the point of view of, depends where you sit in the organization, how much control you have over that. But give yourself an about it. Many people, a range of organizations, both in the military and elsewhere, in quite senior positions at the time, I think I see as caretakers. They turn up, they do whatever they, and then they leave, and there's in what they do in don't necessarily to move the, I say the game, whatever the situation they're in is, and then leave, rather than perhaps looking at what could really make a difference, what would make us better, faster, or miss less opportunities. And that comes down to a bit of understanding the context, have a deliberate analysis of it, and then derive a vision and a mission. And I'll talk a little bit about that for RAF Sport in due course. But key in that, I do think, is care, and have a passion and own whatever that mission is, and own that mission and push that ownership down as far as you can into your people, and hopefully inspire them a bit from the point of view of, this is where we wish to go. The great example of that always is when President Kennedy went into the NASA headquarters back in the early 60s and said, why are you here? And spoke to the cleaner who was sweeping the hangar, and they said, I'm here to put a man on the moon. And if you argue that spread of the mission across the organisation, is an impressive piece to consider, I think. And I was chatting to somebody earlier today, and we were talking about planning and plans. And plans are dreadful, but planning is really useful. So I suppose I could change put it and say, have a plan, or do some planning. In defence, we have a really good system I've mentioned before called the estimate. And the estimate is effectively a very formal, some would say rigid, but it's not. It's a matter of a process by which we go through and you adjust and veer and haul within it to actually allow you to do very effective operational planning in a short time frame when it's urgent, or in a more deliberate way as you go forward. And we have a thing called DLOS, Defence Lines of Development. And the beauty of those is they have whether it's training equipment, personnel, information, doctrine and concepts, logistics, infrastructure, and finance. I think I've missed organisation out of that, but the attraction of using that kind of framework in what you require, because the point is the DLODs don't have a fixed hierarchy. It depends on what you're trying to deliver through your mission or vision. You use those to make sure you don't miss something and you don't have a partial answer in coming up with your plan. And then have that plan, A1 to 9, again, in personnel, minus policy, and the framework you use. And I suppose it's a project management, program management kind of tool, but just make sure you capture the entirety of the task. And then in that planning, then go back up again and just make sure nothing's really changed and you proceed on that bit. So do understand, get a mission, live it, have some passion about it, and then have a plan to deliver it. I have seen some really bright people in the services who then have a plan to deliver it and then somehow fail to deliver it because there is a stereotype of us in the services. We're a bit command-led, we're a bit controlling and whatever. And the people then who have got a great plan but don't always succeed are those that have yet to be able to empower their teams to the plan. If you try to do it yourself, you will inevitably fail. You have to be imbued with the plan sufficiently, and you have to have sufficient knowledge or confidence in the knowledge of the people helping you develop that plan, a plan that can succeed. But then I think it's really, really important to empower teams to deliver the plan, but almost go back one before that. Understand your teams, understand your people as well. Not everybody's going to be a leader. In each one of the DLODs that you might have and make sure that they connect with others, you will have leaders, you will have managers, you will have doers. So understand your team and the strengths and the weaknesses of that of the team, arguably, and then let them get on with it and come back to you against the program as to what is going on. I don't think it's delegation empowerment. It's not an abrogation responsibility. It's about allowing people to do stuff, allowing people to figure ways of doing business, and it is about empowering them to deliver on their terms. And of course, what you must do is keep that circle of trust you develop, hopefully, in delivering that plan through that empowerment alive, to make sure that you pick up the nuances that are coming out of that planning. I think the final bullet on me is decide. A real privilege of leadership, a real privilege of command in the service context, where you are in charge to lead a team, a unit, to do whatever you do, is the responsibility to make a decision. And even if that decision is, if it's done deliberately, not to make a decision or not to do something, that's fine. You made a decision. But it is a privilege of leadership to have that responsibility to decide, and then to be accountable for the decisions you make. And that's be it the sports person on the pitch, be that to me as the director for sport or whoever it is, and take that on consciously, and do so in a manner. Of course, being a leader, being a decider, can be a lonely place. And I do think some people sometimes make the mistake of considering leadership as a privilege and a bit of a popularity contest. It just isn't. And that's a privilege in its own right. You get to decide, you get to move the game on, you get to do what is right for the issue that you're facing, and you get to press on against the achievement of your vision. But it can be a lonely place, and it's not a popularity contest. I had some young officers years ago on a unit that I commanded, where the guys and girls did a very similar job, no matter what their rank level was when they're in the deployed space. And I had a kind of a metric I used to say to these young officers: very much the same tactical job, the hands-on day-to-day job as your people are going to do. The reason you're there is you have the capacity to then lead them and come up against, when you come up against a difficult situation, consider it and make a decision to do something about it. There's a temptation to get really close to your team, and you should be close to your team, and you should understand them and know them, have some empathy with them as well. But never get to the point where you say to somebody something, do something now, please. And they say to you, well, I don't want to do that. And I thought you were my friend. Because if you've done that, you've stepped over the line from leadership into friendship. And that's a difficult place to regain from. So it is a real privilege to know the responsibility and bounds of leadership. And the reward of that is you get to change stuff, and you get to make whatever situation you're in a better situation for you, for your people, and for those around you. Sorry, that was a bit impassioned, perhaps. It's something which I do really think about. I think underpinning leadership are values. And Abby, if you could do the next slide, please, that would be great. Values massively important. Values massively important to a fighter, which is what the Air Force is alongside the Navy and the Army. So important to us that we have Air Publication 1. It's our first regulation, if you like, which is the Royal Air Force core values, ethos, core values, and standards. And I'll just talk about the values in there for a little bit, if I may. In order, and they do rank the mnemonic RISE, which is to do with the Air Force, and rising above the rest used to be our strapline in recruiting terms. But that slightly cheesy perspective doesn't undermine the value, if you like, of these values. And the first one on there is respect. And I think it's really important that we have a respect for every individual that is involved in developing the understanding of the context, developing the understanding of the mission and what it is we wish to do, and then developing the plan and delivering it. And that respect goes both ways. So the leader must respect the people that he or she is working with, and they must hopefully pay that back. But that is generally done by standards of behavior and including people in conversations, including people in the discussion. But the end point of that respect also, if you get it right, is that a decider, the leader decides, and will not inevitably be able to take in everybody's view, everybody's perspective, and whatever. And some may feel left out. Some may feel that that their perspective hasn't been taken forward. What they should never do is feel that that perspective hasn't been taken into account. So the respect, to say, goes both ways. And ultimately, the respect is when the leader has made a decision, if they've done this whole process, there's a respect for, I understand why you made that decision. I may not agree with it entirely, but I will now carry on and deliver that against that. Really important in that respect is integrity. And I was, again, talking to somebody earlier on, I said, any integrity that we might wish to dwell upon or discuss in the news of late. But integrity is massively important to me. And I think it's about being absolutely honest. It's about being impartial. And it's about making sure that whatever you are tasked to do in whatever part or role or issue you are playing is to look at what is the best answer for the common good. It's not the best answer for part of the organization. It's not the best answer for an individual. It's the best answer for the common good. And I do have conversations on occasions, because the Air Force is about 32,000 strong. It's made in trades. And occasionally I speak to people and they say, well, of course, what we must do is protect this trade or this branch or whatever. And I say you shouldn't be protecting, because if you're protecting, you are probably setting artificial conditions and barriers in the place of finding. If you can compete and if you can make the compelling case, and you do that through your integrity, you are honest, impartial, and is it the best answer? And on occasions, accept the unpalatable best answer, that whatever it is you currently do for a living may not be as relevant as it once was. Well, then that is the important, that we are delivering both respectfully and with integrity in whatever we do in the leadership environment, and indeed in life in general, I'd offer. So service, I think, is the next one for me. In the AP1, it talks about service before self, and I'm a huge fan of that. Leadership is not about leadership is not one person. Leadership is about what is the common good. And service before self epitomizes, I think, everything in that. And if we do that right, then we will be on the way to a virtuous style of leadership rather than a less virtuous one. And then the last one is excellence. The value is always to pursue excellence. And at our sports awards a couple of weeks ago, R.F. Holton, the Deputy Commander of the Air Force, spoke about excellence. And he said, if you think you've achieved excellence, then you have deceived yourself. Excellence is something you should strive for at all times in every aspect of your personal and collective lives and whatever. So it is something that to strive for, probably never to achieve, because if you think that, then you're deluding yourself. And I thought that was a really powerful message to come across there. There are excellent examples. There are excellent examples where people are applauded for their excellence. But I was really taken, actually, at our sports awards, where we had a sportsman, sportswoman, sports team of the year, and a number of others, particularly some during the COVID era where we awarded people for excellence during the COVID period, but all of them were exceptional. But the humility of all these people, and the understanding, despite some of them being world champions or global champions, or having overcome huge adversity, their humility in understanding they didn't think they were good enough to get an award. They expected, when the 3 nominations for each category were read out, that the other. And so their pursuit of excellence, which is way above any standard I could ever hope to achieve in athleticism, for example, was quite humbling to realize they didn't realize they'd ever got there. And because they didn't, because they wished to carry on and be better, if that makes sense. Good. Next slide, please, Abby. And I would say just other factors. In fact, I suppose the importance of information communication is the only one I put down here as the sort of penultimate slide for the leadership part of this, is the importance of information and communication. Massively up in the importance of information is important. It's a scientific based element, I think, of the leadership equation. My point, I guess, is, but let's not be seduced by the need for perfect information. Understand that leadership, I think, is art, to be informed as far as possible by the science of information and some other factors, but ultimately it requires an individual judgment as to what is the right answer and how to proceed to meet the vision and which set in the context that we talked about previously. We've seen in the past on the news over a number of years, commanders looking at the predator feed and system and getting really focused in on what's going on there and whatever. And I would offer they are getting seduced into the importance of that piece of information in that time and space. There is a reason to be looking at some of that from time to time, but equally you've got to step back and understand you won't necessarily, in most situations, have all the information you require. So you make a judgment on the best information that's available. Please make a timely decision rather than procrastinating going forward. And if you don't make a decision, and on some occasions, in my world, and without being melodramatic about it, or certainly in my world, adjacent to my world, decisions must be made because they're matters of life and death. Most decisions you can change, alter, but first of all, do make a decision on the basis of the best information, not on the basis of seeking perfect information. And the second element of that factor is communications. And I think we've touched on it from the point of view of empowering your people. Talk to them, understand them, have some empathy with them, know what their strengths, weaknesses, aspirations are, and therefore know who's the leader, who's the manager, and the two are different, and who other ways. Next slide, please, Abby. But my final element in this leadership piece, if you like, if I may, is always keep in mind the master principle of war, which goes back hundreds of years, back to Sun Tzu, who was a Chinese warrior going back many centuries. And that was selection and maintenance of the aim. It goes back to selection of the aim from the context you're operating in, maintenance of that aim by ensuring that you have the vision, the mission, or whatever it is. And every time you are doing something, look up, and always look up to make sure that what you're doing is relevant to achieving that aim. That's not on a daily basis or an hourly basis, but just keep looking up. It's very easy, and we're all guilty of it, I'm sure. I know I am, getting dragged down into the weeds of issues and the weeds of matters. You always have to remind yourself, look up, look up. If you don't have to remind yourself, lucky you, I'm not in that place. So that's my personal view on leadership. And I would add in that with an element we talked about with the team at the Sports and Recreation Alliance was a bit about resilience as well. I think if you do leadership right and you know your people, and I'm not saying for one moment I am an exponent of this or a great exponent of this, but you will put them in a place of uncertainty and challenge, but you will manage that uncertainty and challenge. You will have a support around them that they are stretched and developed, and as a result build resilience in the workplace, if you like, as a result of that, and are supported where perhaps they fail and need to be brought back in. But that resilience, but having a go at something important in sport, but important in the rest of the workplace as well, is implicit if you get the other areas right. If you talk to your people, explain what it is, where we are, what we need to do from the point of view of the vision, and how we're going to do it, empower them to do it, put them in that stretch. No one's going to bite their head off if they ask the question that everybody else is wishing to ask. I have a rule number one on any engagement I have is there's no such thing as a dumb question. So if they have that support and confidence in that, they will develop resilience through effective leadership. Great. Abby, if I can ask for the next slide, please. I thought it might be helpful and perhaps interesting if I was to talk a little bit about RAF Sport. That's what I now do as a day job, and it's a brilliant, brilliant job because the subject matter is fabulous. But before I get into the detail of that, when I turned up a few years ago, and perhaps this is an example of the context and the vision, questions about RAF Sport. Why do we do it was the first one. How many of us do it, and what do we look like? What are the characteristics of people doing sport, and are we any good? And I was told why we did it. It's a lifestyle recruitment, and I was told not entirely sure how many people do it, or quite what they look like, what the gender split is, what the age split is, what the and how good are we? Because I said if the 100 meters record is about 20 seconds, I'll have a crack at it. As it turns out, it wasn't. So it was somewhat below that, pleasingly. But that set in train for me a journey to where I hope we are at the started Chilean phrase, if you like, for RAF sport. I was perturbed that we knew why we did sport, but explicitly, well, I got the wrong reasons. I was told it's about lifestyle recruitment and retention, as I say. If that was the reason we did sport, that's the wrong answer, because as a taxpayer, you don't want to pay for that. I don't want to pay for that. I don't want to pay for somebody's lifestyle, and I don't want to pay for recruitment and retention if there are people queuing around the door to get into the service. So we refocused back to, okay, what is it? Why do we do it? I'll come on to that in a moment. And then how many of us do it, and are we any good? Were other metrics we didn't really have much on, and we are, and so we set about coming up with a strategy. The first part of the strategy, pleasingly, somebody was listening, I guess, when I was found we didn't have a sports strategy, which dismayed me a little bit, was that we had an RAF strategy that we could actually use as our wider context. We could have gone right up into the top of the shop, into the defence plan, into defence strategic guidance and whatever, but actually we have a kind of an easy ready reckoner into the service. We tend to look at two up. What is our boss's intent? And in this instance, the RAF strategy 2021 was a great start point for us. And that's one part of the strategy, one part of the context. Of course, the other part of the context is, so what's the government design? What's the design? What's the Sport and Recreation Alliance? What is the NGB's intent? Wide context there. So we started setting about looking at that. Can I have the next slide, please, Adam? Thanks. And brilliantly, in the strategy is one of the pillars of the 5 pillars of the strategy is build a for the future. People in, we train them further, we give them force development opportunities, we give them adventurous training, which are places of stretch and uncertainty, but done in a training environment. And the bit I think we were missing was actually sport offers a great deal to that developing the workforce of the future. Undersold because we didn't realise why we were doing it. And my big thing with why we're doing it, it goes back to, is our industry violent? Is our industry within bounds, legally, on orders, so we don't just do it because we can? And actually, as a result, does sport make us better at doing that? Does it make us better service people? Does it make us better citizens overall? Does it contribute to our delivery of our day job? And that was the cornerstone on which we set, where do we take the RF sports strategy? So that's the strategy there. There are a bunch of other plans Air Force-wise, and there's also the Astra initiative, which is looking to embrace new technologies and innovation right at the cutting edge of it. And bring those into, alongside a number of other development areas, into the world to make sure we have an Air Force fit for the 2030s and the 2040s. So next slide, please. So we took all of that, and I wouldn't expect anybody to read that, but we came up with a strategy for Royal Air Force Sports Strategy, which looked at the context we were operating in, and then came up with the vision of recognised resource rewarding RAF sport for all, which Abby mentioned at the start there. Really importantly, enhancing the operational delivery of air and space power now, because that's also a part of the changing nature of our context, is the changing nature of conflict and involving space, and one could put cyber in there as well, by challenging developing the whole force. So you have the service person is part of the whole force. We have the civil service colleagues we work alongside who deliver air and space power, and we have contractors, civilian contractors who deliver air and space power as well. How do we do that? And that's our enduring mission over time on this 3 to 5 year change program. I'd characterize this as in delivering sport. Our mission was broken out for that. In the first instance, let's do better at delivering RAF sport to enhance our operational effectiveness, fighting spirit, and that's a different beast, and therefore, and personal development. And personal development, by that, I do mean personal development from the point of view of both mental and physical well-being. Historically, we've done sport very much on the basis of it's good for people being fit, but actually physically fit, not mentally fit. And the two, I think, and we've seen it during the pandemic, massively important benefit of physical activity and sport to both mental and physical well-being overall. We came up with a bunch of ends, ways and means, or the ways and means in that deliver RAF sport safety to best of. Because, as I say, we do it at work, therefore we have a different wrap. We do sport by taking the national governing body rules for how sport is conducted, and we put a bit of a wrap around that because we're doing stuff at work. So British Mountaineering Council, for example, as I understand, don't require people to wear a helmet if they're going mountaineering. We do. So that's the kind of sliver of a wrap we put around there to make sure our people are doing it safe. Really importantly, though, we're talking about delivering it to best effect at all levels. We'll come on to that very briefly in a moment. Next slide, please. So there are three of us in this game, and delighted to see my other two colleagues, CEOs of the Sports Federation, the Central Fund, on the call today. So we have Royal Air Force Sport. I look after the public policy governance of sport. So what do we do at work on duty, and how do we make sure that is safe? That's not being risk averse. And an example I tend to use here is if you go to ice slidings, you do the skeleton or the Cresta run, you tend to get a brief of hold onto the handrail going down to the track because it's icy. And that's to make sure you actually take the risk in the appropriate way. You don't break your ankle on the way to the track. You go on the skeleton track and you go down that, and that's where you are developed and whatever. We want to make sure you get to that. So we are risk aware, not risk averse. Sports Federation essentially are the non-public reciprocal of me. We have a construct in RAF Sport where we are public bodies and we are also non-public bodies, charities in large part for a number of the associations, in the administration and the financial arrangements for sport. You wouldn't invent it this way today, but it's been around 100 years or so, and it works for us right now. And then brilliantly, we have the Central Fund with Ross and his team, who are major funders and grant providers and wider supporters of sport in the Air Force. Between the three of us, we call ourselves the Triumvirate, or I call ourselves the Triumvirate. I'm not sure they're too taken with the name, and I wish I could think of a better term, but that's where we are. And we support, it says there 49 sports associations, it's now actually 52 sports associations. What sports? Next slide, please. So we do everything from archery to volleyball and everything in between. So we have now 52 sports associations and we have about 88 sub-disciplines. And it depends how you count them. We've probably got over 90 in some ways now. So there should be something for everybody in there. We routinely review what sports go on and we look at new sports coming in. And there's three I highlight there: sub-aqua, video gaming and esports, and challenging pursuits. Sub-aqua wasn't recommended sporting activity. We brought them. Video gaming and esports, we see an increasing blurring of the lines between video gaming and esports, between the virtual and the real and the physical world in a range of. We brought them in to see if we can force multiply to leverage them to better effect through a range of sports, ways in their own good. We've seen a change of what our people want. In a new category, like adventure racing and things like the Talisker Whiskey Atlantic Challenge, which we just sent a team out on duty for 4 to row for 39 days or thereabouts, 2 hours on, 2 hours off, to develop their the service as a result. So there's a fair offer on the place, in place for people there. The offer and the lifestyle for our people is a box. There's plenty to say. I think you agree on offer there. Next, please. So we have 3 priorities in sport: participation, competing and winning. 32,000 people in the service, plus the whole force, plus whoever else. And our aim is to get 32,000 3 organisations participating in physical activity, leading into sport, competing, being the best it can be, and winning. And I've talked earlier a little bit about success at each and every level. And my dreadful record, if you like, in the Holton cross country. Sport is, if you let it go, you've succeeded. If you get a personal best, you've succeeded. If you win your unit RAF championship or whatever, you've succeeded. But you can succeed at each and every level. And that's been quite a sea change, I think, from some of the focus in some of our sports, where it's all just about looking at the top of the shop. And our view between the 3 of us all is, if you get 32,000 people doing stuff, you will get the top, you will get the elites, you will get the senior squads coming through, because enough people do something, you will lose the rest, and that's the wrong answer. So we have 3 priorities in sport, and it does sometimes surprise people what those are. Next slide, please. And we deliver sport through our sports associations and station clubs. Really, really important that we have, between the 3 organisations I've mentioned there, we do a. And we must, in this instance, although I'm not a fan of protection, we must act. Who run the sports associations and the station clubs. They're our centre of gravity. That's a military term for if they go, everything fails. You will always have the centre of gravity must protect, and therefore ensure that are able to continue, because people capacity as additional duties, no different to the civilians, where people do stuff in the community, them and make sure in it for them as our delivery. Next slide, please. Very quickly, a couple of pictures there of the kind of range of activity. Which, as I say, spans across from air sports right through to a range of fencing, Nordic and stuff in there. And then through to the challenging pursuits. I'm aware I'm running a bit to time, so very briefly, next slide again. Doing sport in the UK, we also get our people out to be challenged, stretched, developed, become more resilient by getting them the opportunity to do overseas visit. It's not for military tourism. It's for better climate, guaranteed climate. The parachutists tend to go to the States because you're guaranteed climate there. So in some sports, there's just better competition, particularly some of the niche sports overseas, or indeed facilities where we can guarantee people great facilities on in their sport, so that we are succeeding at each and every level. A head mark of our sport is beating the Army and the Navy at the inter-services competition we run, so we're more capable of doing that. And ultimately, next slide. So, and ultimately, looking towards our elite athletes. We have about a dozen elite athletes in the Air Force, people who have come through our sporting life in the service, been developed and stretched so they're better service people, but then have reached a standard at national or professional standard where the national governing body will request to come and train and work and compete with them full time. And we offer that through a very rigorous process to make sure that there is the right standard, there is the right wrap around them, and they do have the potential to go. But I put this up here for some great stories there. The lady on the bottom left is serving below the knee amputee who's overcome huge adversity to take up sport and is currently in contention for the Paralympics coming up in Beijing. Right the way through to Josh McNally there in the middle, third down, who is a professional rugby player for Bath. And I know they're not having a great time at the moment and whatever. But the point of the elites is they are given the privilege to go and do that sport. They're released from their... and they come back in and... back into the service, and they act as an inspiration for those around as well. I would say in that a common denominator for most of them is most of them did not do their sport to any particular level before they joined the service. And the example, which is a great example, I think, of that in this area, is Shanwayne Stevens, third down on the right, who is came into the service. He's an RAF regiment gunner. What does that mean? That's an infantry, a soldier for us, doing of our facilities. Was selected, has recently been selected as the Jamaican bobsleigh pilot, again looking for contention. He had never bobsleighed at all prior to being in the service. Models in there, we do applaud and laud, but they are hugely influential in drawing people in, because most of them have got a great story to tell. I'd never had a go until there's inspiration for that. Great. Sorry, I've run over a little bit there. Next slide, please. That's me done. In case you're wondering what that is the Crest to Run in St. Moritz. It's quite a focusing piece. That's not me, by the way, but delighted to be able to have a talk with you today and be really thrilled to be able to take any questions you may have. And I hope that was of use to you. Thank you. I'm going to ask for some guidance from Abby now. I can see the questions. Abby, do I just crack on and answer those?
Yes, please.
Perfect. Okay. So the first question is, from experience in the Air Force, when you were faced with hybrid safety, how did you manage the expectations and relationships with your seniors? Interesting one. You manage it by using the values that I talked about earlier on. You respect their position. You have sufficient integrity to tell them the truth, and you then take the answer that they give you. So an example I would have when we were looking at going to out to conduct operations over Libya about a decade ago. There were a couple of issues that were raised, and I was said it as it was, effectively on the basis of good information, not perfect information, on the basis of the best information I had at the time. Addressed that to some very senior people, one of whom was known for being particularly abrasive, although I never found it myself. But he did actually thank me at the end of the day to say, thank you for the truth. And so I think if you are true to yourself and true to the values I talked about earlier on, then you are what you are. You say you do the best you can, you present your case as well as you can, and then in our context particularly, and in some of the high pressure situations, you accept the answer you get and carry on. What can the sport and recreation sector learn from the armed forces in terms of demonstrating strong leadership? I guess it's a piece of coming to see us, not necessarily in the sporting piece, but it's a matter of we have a capacity for deliberate thought in the services. We are an insurance policy, so the reason we exist at all is that when you need us, you really need us, and there isn't time to develop us. So we are sitting on the shelf ready to go. When we're not being asked to do what it is we might be asked to do, which might be quite intense and quite demanding, we tend to have a bit of spare capacity. So we have an ability for deliberate thought, and I think and we also, although you wouldn't believe it in the press, I do think we take a very deliberate long-term view. So I talked about planning previously. There's a thing called Global Strategic Trends. It's a publication based on some analysis that's done. There's a defense plan which looks out a number of years, as is our strategy. And I guess in common with others, I do see quite a lot of short-termism sometimes in a range of organizations, is to take that longer-term view. But that perhaps, simply put, is long-term view in the right context, look up and actually come and talk to us. We have a problem in that we don't talk enough to people out in the civilian world. I have a problem with us in sport. We do it behind closed doors. We do it behind the wire. We need to be getting out and talking to very much. And I would say people come and talk to us, if you wish to, come and talk to us, and then perhaps we can see very specifically in some areas what we can do. We already see, for example, the England rugby team come and train with the Army quite often. We have training sessions with a number of different national government body sports, just to imbue that service ethic, that excellence model, perhaps more than they might necessarily get, and compare and contrast the two. Talk to us though, and see what we can do, because I'm really keen, particularly in the Air Force, that we do engage with all sorts of people out there to break down the barriers and educate each other about each other. How do we create an environment through our own leadership to start to develop more with the leaders within our organization? I think it's a deliberate act on the organization's part. They say there are plenty of opportunities in leadership schools and programs out there, but the start point for all of those is, and there's almost too much choice, I'd offer. I think the start point for most of it is actually accept not everybody needs to be a leader. Consider what your talent program needs to look like, and identify the people that need to be in on that, and then really do make time for it. So we have a mantra in RAF Sport: it's not time off for sport, it's time for sport. And the same thing in terms of leadership, I think, is make time to consider who, how, and what you need to develop with your people. And it won't be everybody, and that is part of the decision-making process and selection process of that, but make time for it. We're all very busy all the time. Great fan of deliberate thought, as you will gather. What advice would I give to anybody who's coming into a leadership role in their sector or organization? I think I would take my second and third slides, if you like. I would say understand the context, have a passion about what you do. Every role I've done in the Air Force, and I've done about 15, 16 roles in the Air Force over my time. We tend to change roles every 2 years or so. When you get into the organization you're getting into, is do your deliberate analysis, understand the context, see what might need to be changed. In an ideal world, you will turn up somewhere and find that the place is perfect and nothing needs to be changed and the world hasn't changed around you. So you've got nothing to do. And then you can be a caretaker as long as you maintain that standard. But do the analysis on where you're coming into to understand what better might look like. Not what best might look like, but what better might look like in the first instance, and then codified it, write it down, and then bring your people with you. Oh, interesting. What did somebody wish to told me during your career journey? I've been told plenty during my career journey. I think I wouldn't say something that I'd wish I'd been told, something I was told and hopefully have embraced and imparted is enjoy the journey. Because as I say, did close to 34 years as a regular officer, absolutely brilliant, and I wouldn't change a day. And I think very few people do that. But I focused on, in each role that I did, really enjoying it and hopefully developing it as far as I could take it, understanding in 2 years you often don't see the end result, but you develop as far as you can. And then a good promotion or advancement will come. And then one should never seek, I don't think, promotion or advancement for its own sake. One should seek it because the opportunity to change things more, to do things better or whatever. The question here, how do you balance continuing to learn while leading? One of the criteria that we get reported on in the military is leadership. Then one of the other aspects we looked upon is what is our potential for advancement. And one of the things I consider when I look at people, and have looked at people looking for advancement, is how hard are they working now? So that's partly their interest, but also it's about their capacity for more. And do they have a capacity for more? Because some people are working very hard and are doing really well, but actually if you ask them to do one more thing, that would break them. Some people are working pretty hard, but have capacity for more, have the intellect for more, have the interest for more. And so I guess it's a matter of making sure that you identify, try and make that capacity for you. And part of that is looking up, and you start to see what's really important in delivering against your mission at whatever level that happens to be. That can be the table tennis captain, that can be the captain of industry, and anywhere in between. But look up and make sure what you're doing is relevant, because a lot of us do stuff that is diversionary activity, I think. But at some point, and life does get in the way, and I actually get that, is you need to invest in yourself. And so that's a matter of, you have your day job, you then have to use some of your own time, as we do in community sport, we do in service sport on occasions, in leadership and further study, you use your own time to develop that as well. But if you do it whilst you're in the workspace, so I did a master's, my first master's degree was in my own time to an extent, but the reward of that is you can bring a lot of your learning back into the workspace, and the workspace informs your learning. So it's not it's not as difficult as it might seem. So I think that's how I would do that. I think that's it from question and answer. Ali, is that the deal?
Yeah, I think that is it, Rich. Thank you so much for your insight. Apologies, everybody. Much like the nation, we've had to revert to plan B, as Lisa has had to jump on a separate call at 4 o'clock. So it'll be myself, Alex Sexton, doing a small wrap up here. But a massive thank you to Rich Bogdan for his insight, expertise and knowledge in the area of leadership. So fantastic takeaways for us all today. And a huge thank you to Abby and the team at Gately for hosting us today. This series will continue early next year. More details will be on the way for that. And there will be a period of networking post this. I think we're all about to be kicked out of this room and back into the networking area. So if you do want to stay with us for that, that will remain open, I believe, for the next 50 minutes or so. But yeah, just once again, a huge thank you to Rich. It was a fascinating insight into your career in the RAF and Director of Sport at RAF Sport. And hopefully we all took away some fantastic learnings this afternoon. So thank you again.
Pleasure. Thank you.